Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. The government shutdown has now stretched into day 7. The update, we're now talking about weeks, not days, in terms of how long this thing could last. No one yet seeing the light at the end of this tunnel. No glimmer of hope on this horizon. And this glass is definitely more half empty than half full right now. The House and Senate have both adjourned until the new year. And that means about 800,000 federal workers will ring in the new year either on furlough or without pay. Here's how Republican Congressman Mark Meadows put it yesterday.
Well, obviously, over the last 24, 48 hours, things have not progressed. At this point, it looks like we could be in for a very long-term shutdown.
As for the president, he is now upping the ante and leveling a new threat. Either he gets his wall funding or he closes the southern border. That's the new one. Let's get over to the White House right now. CNN's Boris Sanchez is there. Boris, it is starting to sound like they're getting further apart than closer together. What are you hearing there right now?
Hey there, Kate. Yeah, in the words of the incoming acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, this morning here in the North Lawn of the White House, talks have broken down. Mulvaney confirming that Republicans approached Democrats sometime last week with a deal to end the government shutdown that contained less money than the president had demanded, that $5 billion he had demanded for border wall funding. He wouldn't specify a figure, but that confirms reporting from CNN that Republicans approached Democrats. Originally in our reporting, we had heard it was somewhere in the realm of $2.5 billion for border wall funding. According to Mulvaney, Democrats didn't even make a counteroffer. They essentially said, we're leaving, and they left for the holiday. He does not believe that Democrats want to make a deal. He says he has a gut feeling that Chuck Schumer wants to move forward, but he believes that Nancy Pelosi is the one holding the cards here, and he thinks that she doesn't want to make a deal because it'll impact her chances of becoming Speaker of the House. Listen to this.
This all comes down to Mrs. Pelosi's speakership. I think left to his own devices that Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats probably would cut a deal, but they're protecting Mrs. Pelosi. She does not have the votes, and if she cuts a deal with the president of any sort before her election on January 3rd, she's at risk of losing her speakership. So we're in this for the long haul.
Now, we should point out, according to our reporting, it appears that Pelosi does have the votes to become Speaker, and Democrats have planned to vote on one of 3 potential stopgap measures to end the government shutdown, none of which, I should mention, include any funding for the president's border wall. He's been active, as you noted, on Twitter this morning. I want to point out this tweet because the timing of this tweet is really interesting. He writes, quote, "We will be forced to close the southern border entirely if the obstructionist Democrats do not give us the money to finish the wall and also change the ridiculous immigration laws that our country saddled with." Hard to believe there was a Congress and president who would approve. It goes without noting, Kate, that if the southern border were fully closed, as the president is suggesting here, that the ramifications to the United States economy would be immense, not to mention to a stock market that is already volatile. Further, in another tweet, the president suggested that we should go back to the days of pre-NAFTA. It's unclear if he means that he has the intention of potentially scrapping that USMCA deal that he bragged about earlier this year, Kate.
Yeah, so is the new NAFTA on, or is the new NAFTA now going to be off? And now he wants complete comprehensive immigration reform with this deal? That tweet is confusing, if nothing else. Great to see you, Boris. Thank you so much. A lot to discuss here.
Thank you.
So if this goes into the next Congress, which is likely, what does that mean for the new Democratic majority in the House? Joining me right now is Politico's Congressional Bureau Chief, John Bresnahan. John, I was joking to my producer this morning. You and I on TV together is like the inmates running the asylum at this point. So let us continue. Jake Sherman had a great quote in the playbook today from a senior Democratic aide that said, what part of Democratic majority and he's not getting the wall do they not understand? That is a pretty confident statement. You have reporting on what the Democratic majority could be planning. What are the options?
Well, Boris mentioned it in his introduction also, that they have 3 options they're talking about. One is a short-term funding bill to reopen the government, restart negotiations. That would allow government operations to continue till February 8th. The other 2 are fund everything but the Homeland Security Department for the rest of the fiscal year through September 30th. And the other is just do a continuing resolution, kind of flat level funding for the rest of the year for all government agencies that have been funded, all 9 departments that have been funded. None of these are options that Trump wants to take, or the Senate Republicans, and Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer have offered them already.
And well, that is one of my questions. Have they floated these options to President Trump yet?
Well, I mean, look, Schumer and the Senate Republicans did a deal on the February 8th continuing resolution. So that was, at the time, the Senate Republicans thought, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell thought Trump would sign that. So
right.
That's right. So that's been out there already. They've talked to, and when Schumer and Pelosi met with Trump in the Oval Office in that unbelievable meeting, now famous meeting, this was the other two options were what they discussed. We'll give you regular appropriations bills for everything but Homeland Security, and we'll just fund that through the rest of the year at flat level, or we'll just flat level fund everything. So they've shown the White House all these cards up to now.
This new line that we are now hearing coming from the White House, that Schumer's ready to make a deal, but it's Pelosi who's holding things up. Do you see any evidence of a crack in what has been, to this point, a united front between the House and Senate Democratic leaders? No,
and with all due respect to Mr. Mulvaney, Pelosi has the votes to be Speaker. You mentioned it as well. She has the votes to be Speaker. This is not about her being Speaker. Listen, Pelosi has not talked to anybody at the White House since December 11th. So, they're not talking to Pelosi at all. And so when they say this is all about Pelosi, they're not even speaking to her. So, I mean, they're speaking through Schumer. I do think they're trying to drive a wedge between Schumer and Pelosi. It's pretty evident what they're trying to do. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. These are two old hands at negotiations. They know what the game the White House is playing. I don't think that's going to go anywhere.
Well, let us see. Great to see you, John.
Thanks for having me on, Kate.
Thanks so much. Joining me right now to continue the discussion, Democratic strategist and former Clinton White House aide Keith Boykin, and conservative radio host and CNN political commentator Ben Ferguson. Guys, I have so many questions for you right now.
Morning.
Ben, what do you think of the options that John Bresnahan has laid out in terms of really what Democrats are looking at? What if McConnell gets pressured to send something to Trump that he doesn't want to sign?
Yeah, look, I don't think that's probably going to happen. I think what you see here is you actually have both sides that are pretty united in a strategy. I think Nancy Pelosi does have the votes to become the Speaker as long as she doesn't do a deal before they vote on her. If she did do a deal with this White House before January 3rd, it could put her in jeopardy getting that job. So I'll say on the shutdown here, I don't think anything's going to happen until after January the 3rd when she becomes a Speaker. She has those votes now. Why take that risk politically if you're her? It would make no sense. And then you're going to see a real deal to come together. I think at the same time, Republicans seem very clear here with the Democrats leaving town. Okay, we'll deal with a new Congress after January the 3rd, and let's come to the table, and I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z. The president's laid that out to keep this going and to fight for his border security, and that's when I think the real game's going to begin, when she is actually the Speaker of the House.
And Phil Mattingly said to me last night, and it was really eye-opening, it's not about is this going to make it into the new Congress, it's how far into the new Congress this is going to stretch.
Exactly.
Is where we are right now, which is a scary thought for everyone who is now looking at still being out of work or without pay for that much longer. I wonder, Keith, which option, the short-term bill to February, a longer-term kind of funding bill with where things stand, or funding everything except for the Homeland Security budget, if you will, which of these do you think most Democrats would want right now?
I think most Democrats are on board with any option that keeps the government open, that funds crucial priorities, including border security, but that doesn't provide funding for Trump's wall. I mean, I don't think Democrats are rigid on anything except for the issue of the wall. Donald Trump campaigned for 2 years saying that Mexico was going to pay for his wall. Mexico is not paying for his wall. He had 2 years of Republican-controlled Congress in which he could have gotten the wall funded. He did not do so. And now we are here at the 11th hour, the 11th minute, and Trump is decided to shut down the government because he couldn't get this done. Why is it the responsibility of the Democratic Party? Why is it the responsibility of the American people to make up what Donald Trump failed to do? Let's wait till January 3rd while 800,000 people are still suffering, who are federal government employees, who are on furlough, who are on leave, who are working without pay, because Donald Trump decides to have a meltdown to appease his base. That's essentially the situation we are right now. The Democratic Party is unified on this. The only question is whether Donald Trump will come to his senses and cut a deal.
One thing, though, is as John was pointing out earlier, this new line, Ben, I want to get your take on. Schumer wants to make a deal, but it's Nancy Pelosi who's holding it up. I mean, all the reporters I'm talking to are saying that that is not what they are seeing. The facts are not there. They're clear in that the view is that this is the White House trying to push a wedge between these two leaders.
Yeah.
Why are they now making this about Nancy Pelosi and not about the wall? What does that tell you?
Well, I think you're talking about the government shutdown here. I don't think the Democrats in the House are willing to do anything until after she has secured the speakership, because if she does come together with a deal with Schumer, and I think Schumer's probably one of those that understands the optics of this long term, you want to get the government open, especially when Democrats take control of the House pretty quickly. But she understands she wants to be the speaker, and if she does a deal with Donald Trump, there are Democrats that will leave her and say this is exactly why we didn't want her to be speaker. She's already doing deals with Donald Trump. We don't want to do that.
Right, but Ben, you're saying a different version of what we're hearing from the White House. And what I'm telling you is, from very smart reporters on the ground, they are saying that is not what they're seeing, that there is no division between Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi on this. Yeah. They're together. This isn't
I think Chuck Schumer... Look, I think Chuck Schumer's taking the lead of the House, securing Nancy Pelosi, and then they're going to decide what they want to do. I also think that they believe that a government shutdown long term is not bad for the Democratic Party. They're going to keep pointing to Donald Trump, saying this is his fault. The one caveat here is if you talk to conservatives, you talk to Trump supporters, you talk to the Republican base out there, they see this as a real issue of national security. They're okay with a government shutdown to get the funding for the wall and to get this thing built. So you have two different sides here that look at this as actually a political opportunity for them. That's why I think this could go on for a long time and long after.
I will say, though, that the threat coming from the president right now is now a new one, though. It's now, I'm going to shut down the entire southern border, which you being a Texan, I don't know if that would be something you would support. Keith, I do want to ask you one thing, though, because one thing that Ben is pointing out is that when you're talking about political advantage, and it's horrible to talk about it when you have people's jobs who are on the line when you're talking about it, but that's what you see in Washington, is Democratic priorities going into the new Congress were an array of things: infrastructure, gun control, voting rights, you name it. Not among them keeping the government open. But that is what they're going to be having to deal with almost exclusively when they take control of the House. Is that already a win for Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, you know, it's interesting. The Daily Beast had an article about this today, that Trump and people in the White House actually are assuming right now that the shutdown actually benefits them, because it supposedly distracts from the agenda the Democrats want to put forward in January. And there was one source close to the White House who was in the Daily Beast article today who said that they actually want Pelosi not to be able to focus on investigations on Trump by focusing on the government shutdown. Well, I've got news for the White House. Nancy Pelosi,
focus on that.
That's what they said in the Daily Beast today. That Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats will continue to investigate Trump and hold Trump accountable. They will continue to make sure that there is oversight that should have happened for the past 2 years. And the shutdown is the responsibility of the man who was in the White House, in the Oval Office with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and said just a few weeks ago that he would take responsibility for it. He would not blame the Democrats. He went back on that. He lied about that, just like he lied about who was going to pay for his border wall. And this whole thing needs to come to an end. Donald Trump needs to come to his senses. The Republicans who know that he's wrong need to make this work.
Let me end with this. I talked to a congressman retiring, Ryan Costello, last night, and he said, I asked him, where is the urgency on this? And he said, there isn't any. And the reason why is that both sides right now see that there is a political advantage in their position, which is the saddest statement of the state of affairs. Appreciate you guys coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.
Coming up for us, a new report about the 8-year-old migrant boy who died while in U.S. custody just after crossing the southern border. Could a simple medical test have prevented this horrible tragedy? But first, Wall Street ends the year in dramatic fashion. Of course it had to. So what does all of this whiplash mean for 2019? Stay with us. It's another up and down morning for the stock market. Right now, down slightly, especially in comparison to things what we have seen. This comes after 2 days of gains, including a record-breaking rally on Wednesday, but that is not even mentioning the wild ride that got it there. So where will the markets end today, and what does all of this volatility mean for the overall economy in the coming year? Joining me right now, Rick Newman, columnist for Yahoo Finance, and Richard Quest, CNN business editor at large and host of Quest Means Business. It's great to see you guys. Opposite of what we normally do, let's start with the big question and then kind of work our way down. This month, Rick, is December's turning out to be the worst month for the market since the Great Depression. Last week, it's the worst since the 2008 financial crisis. Name the statistic. There's a lot of records being broken, and for not very good reasons. If this is what 2018 is ending up like, What are things looking like for 2019 in your view?
Well, to put those negative superlatives in perspective, so the whole overall market this year is going to end up down, looks like about probably 6 or 7%. So modest losses for the year. That is the worst performance since 2008, which was the year of the crash. And what we've seen, what this turbulence in the last 3 months is telling us is investors are just very nervous about the outlook for 2019. That doesn't mean a recession is coming. Okay. We're probably not going to have a recession in 2019, and the real economy is still good. But investors are worried about economic growth slowing. Profit growth is probably going to slow. And then there are all these kind of unknowables. What's going to happen with the Trump tariffs and trade policy? Will the government reopen? And these sort of political problems that are very hard to predict.
Absolutely. By definition, when it comes to the president. What are you watching for, Richard, as the, biggest indicator of whether 2019 trends up or takes a nosedive?
Corporate earnings in the first quarter. Corporate earnings is going to be the barometer by which we can determine future growth of the market. We can sum up what has happened as basically the party's over, at least for the time being. And until somebody buys some more booze, that's likely to be the way it's going to be. Now,
Are you offering it up? Are you offering to take that on, Richard? Keep going.
I'll use your credit card because that seems to be the way Americans have been doing it so far. They've been borrowing, they've been buying, not as much as in the past. But look, the party's over, the hangover is there. But it is not going to be a thumping, long-lasting, oh, I wish I'd put my head in a bucket hangover. I think it's going to be much more of those, all right, it's a bit of a slow drudge. And the reason is for all the reasons that Rick's just said. There is no obvious reason at the moment for this market to rally. And before you get a rally, or a sustained rally, I should say, we're going to have lots of dead cat bounces over the next couple of months. But for a sustained rally, you're going to need some form of booze. And I think that's going to come in the form of corporate earnings or deal with China.
And one of the forces, if you will, in the markets that you've been writing about, Rick, is the president and really what the president is saying and doing. Here's one part of one of your columns I was reading. Markets aren't that gullible. They're now sending Trump a message he ought to heed. Get your act together. What do you think getting your act together looks like right now for the president when it comes to the economy?
Well, for starters, reopen the government. I mean, that's just uncertainty we don't need right now. And this whole battle is over a grand total of $3.5 billion in funding, which is minuscule in the federal budget. The booze that fueled the party that Richard was talking about in 2018 was the tax cuts. Now, those are not going away, but the sort of one-time boost you got in corporate earnings is going to be over once we get into first quarter earnings, which we're not going to get until the second quarter of 2018. Right. So we've got the trade policy and tariffs overhanging the market. Is that going to get better and essentially get resolved, which means we go back to the way it used to be and there are no tariffs, which, by the way, are raising costs for consumers and business, or are they going to get worse and raise costs for consumers and businesses more? If Trump wants to stimulate the stock market, one thing he can do in 2019 is resolve the trade dispute with China, get through the tariffs, declare victory, whatever the deal might be, and say, look, I want businesses to get back to business as normal. I don't know if he's going to do that, but stocks would be happy if he did.
Well, and one thing also happening right now, Richard, is that the president is just saying this morning is that if he doesn't get the border wall funding, he's threatening to shut down the southern border completely. I mean, it's a political threat, yes, but what could the real economic fallout be?
Oh, yes, what a great idea. Let's shut down the border. Let's shut down the border where most of American automakers, aeromakers, all sorts of industries that are now part of just-in-time manufacturing send vast amounts of goods between Canada, the US and Mexico. I don't care whether you call it NAFTA, NAFTA 2, USMCA. Right. So you shut down the border and then see what happens. Let's see how quickly you head towards a recession then. These threats, I'm sure the president means that he'll shut the border to everything except those matters of commerce. But it's not going to be that simple. The U.S. economy is a very finely tuned clock. And each one of these events that we're talking about, that Rick eloquently talks about, is sand being poured into the gears, the cogs, and the wheels. It can only take so much before the thing will gunge up.
Do you see the market? I mean, the market already doesn't like the government shutdown. Do you think that even a threat like this? I mean, you talk about just even the words that the president the things the president is saying has had an impact if you look at the past week. The threat with Jay Powell and all of that. I mean, even a threat like this, if it lingers, Even that could do something?
Markets have figured out to discount Trump's rhetoric, and the markets don't really start to react until it looks like there's actually going to be a policy. I mean, there have been many instances of this over time, but we have seen times when this hyperbolic rhetoric actually did turn into a policy. And I think one of the things that is happening is with the economy was stronger, probably stronger a year ago than it is today, which meant it was better able to absorb things that Trump put into place, such as first it was a small number of tariffs on washing machines, and then it was the steel and aluminum tariffs. And the markets got jittery, but then they recovered and they were basically fine. And then it came the Trump tariffs, and they were jittery again, and then they're fine. But all this turbulence we're seeing at the end of 2018 is a signal that we are worried about 2019, and markets are not going to be as able to absorb these kind of hits in 2019, and even especially in 2020 as they were in 2018. And that is something Trump is going to have to pay attention to because he cares about the stock market.
It's not going to be the same movie come 2018. That's a really important point. Richard, Stephen Moore, who advises the president on economic issues, did in the campaign, still talks to him. He tells me that no matter what the market does, the fundamentals of the economy are still strong. He points to unemployment, consumer confidence, and such. And it seems that his point has been to me over and over is somewhat ignore the market right now. Is he right?
Look, Stephen Moore is absolutely correct in terms of the fundamentals of the US economy. No commentator disagrees with him. The problem is, back to my clock, how much do you want to test it? How many dark clouds do you want to put over your head before you've got a storm raining all over you? At the moment, there is no reason to believe that we are going to have anything more than a garden variety cyclical slowdown, which will pick up in due course as the market responds to the tightening of monetary policy, new circumstances, Fed money going away. But if you tinker around with this, and if you start having the bull in a china shop, then all bets are off.
This has been really eye-opening. I think I learned something today. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Rick, thank you. Richard, thank you. Coming up next for us, new information this morning about the 8-year-old migrant boy who died while in U.S. Border Patrol custody. What the medical examiner's report now says, and what it means for an investigation underway. Just days after a second migrant child died in U.S. custody, the Secretary of Homeland Security is heading to the U.S.-Mexico border. Christian Nielsen will be in El Paso, Texas today, Yuma, Arizona tomorrow, and her trip comes as a top Senate Democrat says she wants the Senate to investigate now those children's deaths. The White House says the tragedies show exactly why the nation's immigration laws need an overhaul.
Certainly, that's an absolutely tragic situation, something nobody ever wants to see happen. It's one of the reasons that the president wants to fix our broken immigration system. It's a treacherous journey, and we don't want to see people go that route. We are doing everything in our capacity to make sure that when people do come, that they're taken care of so that we don't have these type of instances. In many cases, they show up extremely dehydrated, without food, and they're seeing a doctor for the very first time.
CNN senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen is joining me now with more on this. Elizabeth, you're learning more about what happened to that 8-year-old boy who died on Christmas Eve.
Right.
What are you learning?
Kay, what we're hearing is that they did an autopsy and they tested for the flu, and he had the flu. Doctors have been telling me this for days, that it sounded like he had the flu, but it appears he was never tested for the flu, even though he had symptoms of it. Let's do a TikTok of what happened. On December 24th at 1:20, he was taken to the hospital with, according to Customs and Border Protection, symptoms of the flu, possible symptoms of the flu, yet there's no mention that he ever got a flu test. So why was he brought in with symptoms of the flu, including a 103-degree temperature, and it appears never tested for the flu? We've asked that question. We have not gotten an answer. He was diagnosed instead of the flu with a common cold, and he was released back to the detention center. Then at around 11 o'clock that night, he was brought back to the hospital because he had gotten sicker and sicker. Not surprising when a child has the flu. And then they tried to revive him, but at 11:48, he was pronounced dead. So lots of questions about why he didn't get a flu test, including, let's take a look at a map that just came out moments ago from the CDC. Look and in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, widespread flu activity. Texas has the second level, a little bit of a lower level of flu activity. Now, this map is new, and so the map that would have been available to these folks when this boy was sick was a little different. There wasn't quite as much flu activity, but still, even then, high levels of flu activity when this boy was sick. He had symptoms of the flu. It appears he wasn't tested for the flu. Why not?
Sarah Sanders, you heard her there. She said today that they're doing everything in their capacity to make sure that people crossing the border are cared for. You've been talking to experts kind of about this. What do they think?
You know, they really question what they said. They think Sarah Sanders is just wrong. They said, look, obviously everything wasn't done for this boy. CBP, the government, has medical professionals. Why didn't they insist on a flu test? Why didn't they tell the hospital he has signs of the flu, do a flu test? They knew he had signs of the flu. Secondly, this boy was sent back to a crowded detention center, or I should say to a detention center, many of them are crowded, with a 103-degree fever. He had just had a 103-degree fever, and he's sent back to a detention center. It's not great health care for him. And what about for everyone else who was there? Flu can spread like wildfire, and you're sending a child who just had a 103-degree temperature back to a detention center with many other people. The third question that experts have, Kate, is they want to know, were these children, or really anyone else, vaccinated upon entrance? Vaccinating people is very, very easy. It is not expensive, and it's very effective. Were they vaccinated for the flu when they were admitted to these centers, or for any other contagious disease that could save lives?
A lot of questions still. Great to see you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing it to us. In California, the manhunt for a suspected cop killer is getting more intense as we speak. Police officer Ronald Singh, he was shot early Wednesday morning. And while officials haven't released the name of the alleged gunman, you see him there on your screen. The sheriff says he's an undocumented immigrant. Listen.
This suspect is in our country illegally. He doesn't belong here. He's a criminal.
This is the first death of an officer in the line of duty in the history of the Newman California Police Department. Singh leaves behind his wife and a 5-month-old son. Just horrible. Coming up for us, Trump's controversial decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria is getting high praise from one prominent member of the Senate. Is Rand Paul's influence growing with President Trump right now? And why is it worrying administration officials if that's the case? That's next. It's no secret that President Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria has been met with backlash from his own party and his own cabinet. But one Republican senator has praised the president's actions. Listen here to Rand Paul.
I'm very proud of the president. This is exactly what he promised. And I think the people agree with him, actually. I think people believe that we've been at war too long and too many places, and that we do need to turn attention to problems we have at home here.
So is Senator Paul just showing his support, or is this something more than that now? Washington Post columnist and CNN political analyst Josh Rogan, he makes the case that it's the latter, not the former. Josh is joining me now. It's great to see you, Josh.
Likewise.
I want to read a graph from your piece for everyone because it was really enlightening. Several U.S. officials and people who have spoken directly to Trump since his Syria decision tell me, Josh Rogan, they believe that Paul's frequent phone conversations with Trump wholly outside the policy process are having an outsized influence on the president's recent foreign policy decisions. How did this come about?
Well, there's been a long-standing concern inside the White House, State Department, DOD, NSC about the influence Rand Paul was having over the president's foreign policy thinking, especially with regard to Russia. But after the Syria decision, everyone sort of looked around and analyzed it, and they said this is the watershed moment where Rand Paul's foreign policy influence on the president has now overpowered that of the entire national security cabinet. I mean, the president was speaking to Rand Paul on the phone about this, going to golf, talking about this, and he didn't check with his Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, okay? And then in the wake of it, you see them publicly aligning to support this policy. After that interview with Jake Tapper, President Trump tweeted out Rand Paul's criticism of U.S. generals. Then when President Trump went to Iraq, he stood in front of U.S. troops and criticized U.S. generals. So it's not just this one issue. On a range of foreign policy issues and in the direction that U.S. foreign policy is going, Rand Paul and Donald Trump are now steering the ship pretty much together, and the rest of the people who are supposed to be involved in our national security policymaking process are really upset about it.
Well, and that is what is at least one part confounding, if not why it's so confounding, is that that he appears to be taking Rand Paul's opinion over that of his defense secretary, his secretary of state, his national security advisor when it comes to Syria. Lindsey Graham told me that they were all telling him not to pull out of Syria.
Right, and the president's allowed to get advice from whoever he wants. If he happens to agree with Senator Paul on this issue, that's his prerogative. He's the president; it's his decision. But the concern is not just about the fact that he's cutting out other voices; it's that he's cutting out good information. Okay, Rand Paul has a history of pushing, frankly, false and conspiracy theory information, especially about the Middle East. He said that John McCain met with ISIS in Syria, which is a conspiracy theory. He doubts that President Assad gassed his own people, flying in the face of all U.S. intelligence. So the concern is really that, okay, if the president is making all these important decisions and he has these long-held views, if he's getting bad information from Rand Paul and that's becoming bad policy, that affects everybody. And because nobody knows exactly what's going on between Rand Paul and the president outside the process, there's no way to address it.
Well, and if Rand Paul has his ear, and you've been covering Rand Paul's foreign policy positions for a long time, what's likely to come next, would you say?
Well, that's the other fear. I mean, we've already seen the president announce that he's going to slash the amount of U.S. troops in Afghanistan, something Rand Paul has long pushed. I'm looking towards South Korea. Rand Paul wants U.S. troops out of South Korea. President Trump entertains that idea publicly and privately all the time. But overall, the broad direction of U.S. foreign policy towards withdrawing U.S. commitments, ending U.S. alliances. This is something that President Trump has flirted with and sometimes leaned towards. In 2019, if he and Rand Paul continue to go down this road together, that could have worldwide implications on a range of issues and, undo parts of American foreign policy and national security that have been in place for 80 years.
Yeah, and looking into 2019, Afghanistan and what decision he makes there, that's a huge question that everyone is waiting to see. Josh, thanks so much. Great to see you, man.
Anytime.
Coming up next, help wanted in the House of Representatives. Democrats are looking for a few good attorneys, it appears, as they are getting ready to ramp up investigations, it appears, into the president from the job posting. More on that after the break.